left off on Tuesday. Where did we leave off on Tuesday? Small intestine? With this diagram. So this diagram is kind of reinforcing what I just said about chemical signals and signaling the tube further on down the line. Remember, there's different phases of the digestive process. Understand that all of these phases sort of work hand in hand so that the whole entire digestive process can work smoothly. Okay? Don't forget these chemicals I keep talking about, these hormones or changes in pH, are signals to the digestive process later on down the line. So this diagram is a nice one because it ties together some of the different mechanisms that are going to then trigger the secretion and release of bile. And what's bile doing for me? It's going to help break the hold that lipids have on each other so that what enzyme in the small intestine can break them into their components, lipase. And who's going to help with that? Pancreas. Who else is going to help with some of those organic molecules breakdown? The brush border. Oops, why does this do this? You with me? All right, so this is a nice diagram. Why is this a nice diagram? It's one of those things that takes all that information and makes it what? Small. And that's one of the reasons I like this textbook. Because when it's time to study, if you sit down and read the chapter, your brain's going to blow up. Right? Well, at least it feels that way. But if you can go to these tables and get that overview of information down, understand all the information from these tables, and make sure that you know everything and you're good, that's going to help a little bit better. So if you're going to use your book the night before an exam, you should be looking at things like this. Make sense? Not reading the whole chapter. If there's something, one little thing in here that doesn't make sense, you can go find it and clarify it in your mind in the chapter. But you shouldn't be there the night before an exam. Yes? So if you think that that's what you're doing the night before an exam, maybe that's why it's not working. You're trying to get so much into your brain. It takes time to do that. That's your study time. So, control of small intestine motility by some of these chemicals, also outlined in this table, 23.3 on page 886. So, just like the stomach, we have a chemical job to do in the small intestine near the beginning part. And then as we move through the small intestine, we have what to do? The absorption part. So in the beginning, we have the chemical part still to do, still to break down, because look at all those different enzymes that are being introduced in the small intestine. So the small intestine has different segments, and we call it different things depending on how far in we are, right? What are the different names for the small intestine? Beginning? Duodenum. Then? Ileum. Jejunum. Yes? So what are they again? Duodenum, jejunum, ileum. Yes? So as we move through those segments, we're going to see different things going on. By the time we leave the small intestine, what have we hopefully done most of? Not all of, most of. Absorb those nutrients and break down those chemicals, those large chemicals into small chemicals so they can be used at a cellular level. All right, who's next? Large intestine. So now we're nearing the end of our travels. We start down at the cecum. So the small intestine dumps into the cecum, the beginning of the what? Large intestine. Now this God bless the person that named large intestine. And I think that's why they put it this way in a diagram, so we can kind of remember what all the names are. So we have that going up, which is what? Ascending colon, going up. Then we have some going across, which is the transverse. Then we have some going down, descending. Then we turn into the sigmoid colon, and then we enter the rectum, and finally, the end of the line, the anal canal. So as we move through the large intestine, we are still, believe it or not, going to be able to get some benefit from the nutrients that enter there. Not tons, but not unimportant. One of the things that we're going to find about the anatomy of the large intestine is that it's got these little pockets. Anybody sew in the room? You ever make curtains? Or make something with gathers? I'm going to teach you something about sewing today. So if I want to make something that has little pleats in it, and it's Easter time, so everybody knows what I'm talking about. Everybody knows what I'm talking about? Like one of those little gathered shirts. Boys, do you know what I'm talking about? So, kind of? Little gathered things. Okay. How do I do that when I sew? Well, what I do is I take a wider stitch and I sew it straight across the material. And then I take it and I pull it at the end. And that's going to make all of the little gathers. And then I can come with my sewing machine and make sure I stitch that so it stays that way. Or stitch it in place so it stays that way. Right? Am I right? See? I used to make all my own clothes and curtains. Yes. Very talented. So the large intestine kind of has one of those stitches that I just described that runs along the middle of it. It's called the tinea coli. And it kind of does the same thing. It pulls on the tube and causes it to pucker in little places. Those puckerings are called haustra. Where are we? Is it on the diagram? Yeah. Or haustrum. So one of the very important things we must remember about our nutrition is that it's very important for us to make sure that things move along the tube freely. Because when things get caught up in those little pockets and lots of pressure builds up, that can cause a big problem. What problem might that cause? Something called diverticulosis. Just like we talked about when we talked about that hiatal hernia, where the esophagus went through the diaphragm, that same little kind of thing, build up in pressure inside the tube, can cause it to pucker outside of its wrappings. Now that can be an even bigger issue if something gets caught in those little puckers and starts to kind of ferment and fester. What's that called? The diverticulosis is the little puckers. Now that's not going to kill you, and you might not even know you have them until something gets caught in them, and they become inflamed. Now what do we call it? Diverticulitis. Now remember, this tube is holding a lot of chemicals and chemical waste and waste from the foods that you ate that you couldn't break down or digest, and basically all of those waste products we want to leave the body. But what happens if diverticulitis kicks in and maybe you blow a hole in your tube? This is very bad. It can leak out all of that contents into your abdominal pelvic cavity and cause huge problems with infection, sepsis. Okay, so we want to keep everything in the tube. And we want to make sure everything moves along freely. What's going to help us move things along freely at this point? Because at this point, what am I doing? What do I do in the large intestine? Yeah, I absorb more things like water, so I'll take some of the water out. Yep, getting rid of some of that water. I'm also, believe it or not, absorbing some vitamins. With the help of some friends. Bacteria. Bacteria that live in the lower portion of the large intestine, and sometimes you hear them referred to as your gut bacteria. They're actually continuing the breakdown process, breaking down things you can't break down, and allowing the release of some really important vitamins, things like vitamin K, for example. Anybody know what vitamin K does for a living? Blood clotting, which is kind of important, right? Some of the B vitamins. What are the B vitamins important for? What? No stress. Blood. Yeah, blood. Blood formation, hemoglobin formation. And why is hemoglobin so important? It's going to help deliver oxygen for metabolism, right? So that's a really important thing that's going on in the large intestine. So even though it's a short trip, and we always think of it as kind of the waste dump, everything that gets in there is just going to get thrown out. Well, that's not really the case. Most of it's going to get thrown out, but we still have a lot of important absorption still left to do in the large intestine. So be careful, make sure things move along in the large intestine. And how can we ensure everything moves along? Anybody? Add enough bulk to what's going to end up there. And how could we do that? Fiber. Anybody hear of fiber? Who has a decent consumption of fiber, do they think, in their diet? Yeah, very few hands are being raised. Where do I get fiber from? Yeah, the cell wall of a plant cell is made of something called cellulose. You got no enzymes for that. So when you eat fruits and vegetables, then you're all going, well, so what's the point of eating fruit and vegetables? Because don't forget, it's not just chemical digestion you're doing. What else are you doing? Mechanical digestion. Are you breaking those cells apart when you eat fruits and vegetables? Yeah, and the innards of them are very beneficial to you. Lots of vitamins, lots of minerals, lots of really important, essential nutrients for all of this metabolism stuff. But you can't use the cellulose. So that's going to go out in the trash. That's going to add bulk. That's going to allow you to move things through that large intestine freely. And anybody who's had a problem with moving things freely through the large intestine can attest to the fact that you are quite uncomfortable and grumpy when things don't move along. Yes? Take care of your gut bacteria. One of the products on the market that's starting to be more recognized takes care of those gut bacteria. Anybody know what that? Probiotics. You ever hear that stuff? Is that a lot of hooey? Not really. Not really. Anybody take them? Are you happy? Yes. I take them. I'm happy. Yeah, yogurt has some natural gut bacteria as well. Some products on the market kind of beef up the numbers. Things like Activia. Yeah, and I had this discussion with my nutrition students the other day, so those of you in my class, you're going to hear it again. But be very careful when you introduce probiotics for the first time. Yes. Make sure it's on the weekend. Make sure you're near a restroom. Because your body's going to get used to that. You will go through that. Don't stop. Let your body get used to that, because it'll be so much better for you to get rid of that waste that's in there at a nice, even rate. Allow things to move through your digestive system. And if you don't eat any fruit and vegetables, wake up. You need them. They're good for you. You will feel better if you give your body good food. Okay? You will feel less tired. You will be much happier. And you won't get sick so often. Really. So, take care of not only getting proper nutrients in, but don't forget about the end of the line, because that's important too. So, that's your large intestine. And they talk a little bit about that flora on page 890, your bacterial flora. So very important to keep numbers there. When you have bouts of diarrhea and vomiting, one of the things that's going to happen to you is you're going to eliminate many of these guys. So the part of your recovery process is going to involve giving time to that flora to build itself up again. And it might take a little while. So when you're really, really sick with a bout of diarrhea and vomiting, sometimes it takes a week or two to start feeling yourself again. Why do you think that's the case? Yeah, give them time to build up in numbers and start the release of some of those important vitamins. So that's why you feel really tired, because many of those B vitamins that you're normally getting because of your bacterial flora are lower. This is a little diagram that shows us all of those wonderful organs in the abdominal pelvic cavity and how they hang out. Tons and tons of serous membranes to help hold everybody in place. The mesocolon and the mesentery are very important membranes that hold in the large and small intestine. The mesocolon is associated with what? Take a guess. Which tubes? Large intestine. So that's the guy that holds together all the large intestine. The mesentery, small intestine. I want you to pay close attention when you start your fetal pig dissection. When you go into the abdominal pelvic cavity, you're going to see that the large intestine doesn't necessarily look like that diagram. 1. And 2, when you go in and look at the mesentery, those membranes that hold together the small intestine, you're going to see tons and tons of blood vessels and lymphatic tissue as well. So pay close attention to that when you do your dissection. This section over here shows you all of the different membranes. The other group of membranes that are very important in humans to help hold everything together, I describe them as your little built-in apron, or something called the omentums. And they are layers that cover all of those organs and help hold them in place. They're also dotted with quite a few little flaps of fat. Now, are we getting the idea that maybe when we fill up our flaps of fat a little bit too much, they might do what? Yeah, end up in this region, because we have a lot of them there. And why do you think we have a lot of little flaps of fat there? Well, protection, and all of those tubes are constantly conducting energy. Exactly. So we're using them as energy stores and protection for everything in the abdominal pelvic cavity. So these are a description of some of those major membranes. Pay close attention to them when you do your pig dissection. So, they go on to talk about digestive process in the large intestine. Again, a lot of the water, electrolytes, and harvesting of vitamins is going to happen in the large intestine. One of the things that can be a little bit of an issue, if you don't eat healthy and you start eating healthy, guess who's going to be really happy about that? The bacteria in your large intestine. When you start eating better they're getting their food as well. And one of the byproducts of metabolism in bacteria, methane gas. Yes? So sometimes when you decide to start eating a little bit more healthy, you also might get a little gas buildup. Work through it. Again, your body will adjust, and you'll get past that. Yes? Use Beano. Beano's fine. It's just enzymes that kind of break the bubbles. So if you decide, okay, I'm going to get healthy, I'm going to start eating right, oh my gosh, I get gas. Just get some Beano. You're good. Work through it, because it'll be better for you. So they talk about motility in the large intestine, and they talk a little bit about our little puckerings or haustral contractions. Very important to move things through because things are starting to get a little more dried up because of the water absorption in the large intestine. We have movement called mass movement.
Still mucosa.
Yep. Yep. And when we look at the histology, the inner lining of the large intestine, we're going to see in and amongst those cells quite a few mucus-producing cells as well, goblet cells. Unfortunately, in lab, we didn't get to look at the histology because I don't have any large intestine. That's on my order for next year. But if we looked at the lining of the large intestine, it would look very similar to, I don't have a picture. It would look very similar to what we saw in the small intestine, that simple columnar epithelial cells, but we'd find lots and lots of goblet cells there as well. So the next part of the book then talks about pushing things through the large intestine and ending with defecation. Under homeostatic imbalances, they describe diverticula, diverticulosis versus diverticulitis. So you should know the difference between the two. And itis, anytime you hear itis, what should you think? Inflammation. Defecation is a reflex. A reflex associated with who? The nervous system. So we're talking about groups of nerves and neurons that have to send message from the spinal cord to muscles down in the lower portion of the large intestine, ending up in the anus and the rectum. Those muscles contract and push out what's flowing through the tube. It's very important to understand that you're not born with this ability to control these muscles. Did you know that? Yeah. What has to happen before you have control over, conscious control over these muscles? It's not quite synapses, myelination. In order to send that message, to have conscious control over those muscles, we have to make sure we myelinate all of those fibers that exist. And that takes a little time. There's a lot of them, and there's a long way to go. So we have some road work to do after birth before we have the ability of conscious control over those muscles. How long does it take? 2, 3? Girls seem to be a little bit more gifted in this area than boys. So if you're trying to potty train a small child, remember, when is that child going to have the ability to do this? When that's done. Not when you say. Yes? You can put Cheerios in there, you can give them treats, you can, woo! And the only time it's going to happen is when they have the ability for it to happen. So it depends on each person with time. You can introduce the whole process. When do we typically defecate? Anybody have a dog? When do you put the dog out? After he eats, right? Or she. That's what you should do, by the way. If you're having accidents in your house, start doing that. So get them into a routine, right? And we wake up in the morning, we give the dog we put her out, let her pee, bring her back in, give her food, she eats, put her back out, she poops, we're good. Yes? You kind of do the same thing. So if you're trying to teach or potty train and you think it's time to introduce your child to the potty, what should you do? Same thing you do with the dog. Feed him dinner, and then let's go sit on the potty. Read a book. Have a little story time. But get them used to that routine, because that's typically when you will defecate. When you put more mass in and you'll push more mass out. Okay? And then when they're ready, then you're a happy camper because you don't have to buy diapers anymore, right? Same thing with the urinary system. When we talk about the urinary system, we're going to see a very similar diagram. Same thing happens with that end of the world. That's a conscious control, but it's not going to happen until what? Yeah, until we've myelinated those tracts, and that takes a few years. So, parasympathetic motor or efferent fibers are going to stimulate these muscles to contract. Stretch receptors in the wall are going to signal the fact that there's a volume there. And then voluntary motor nerve, once everything's in place, is going to contract the muscles down lower in the anus. We also have some tissue in there that's going to help with things moving through the tube freely. Sometimes when everything gets a little bit, I know this is a disgusting conversation, but it is anatomy and physiology, and we have them. When things get a little too dried out because they're not doing what? The longer I'm in the tube, the less what's going to end up coming out? Water. Because the cells don't know anything about how long you've been there. They just know what they have to do for a living. And what do they have to do? Absorb the water and vitamins. And so if stuff hangs out there a long time, they're just going to keep doing that. And what happens? You start pooping out little pebbles, right? It's hard for you to move the mass. So you're going to do a lot of what? Come on, folks. Pushing and straining on the tubes. And what can happen? When I push and strain on these tubes, they can inflame or rip or pucker through their linings. Anybody ever have hemorrhoids? Yeah, nobody will admit it, but if you've given birth to a child, that pushing and straining might result in hemorrhoidal tissue inflammation. So some of you are going, oh yeah, been there, done that. So one of the things you can prevent the formation of hemorrhoids, what should you do? Make sure things move through the tube and eat what? Fiber. Yes, that will be very helpful. And anybody who's had hemorrhoids knows not a pleasant experience. We've already finished that part of the chapter. Remember we started at the end? Yeah, so we already talked about digestion. Let me go quick through it quick. Carbohydrate digestion and all the enzymes associated with that. Some of you have already taken an exam. You're happy. Mouth, small intestine, pancreas, and the enzymes associated with the digestion of carbohydrates should stick in your head. Proteins, stomach, small intestine, pancreas, some of the very important enzymes and chemicals associated with protein digestion should be stuck in your head. Also remember pepsin, pepsinogen. What should pop into your mind when I say those two words? Protein and what else? That one needs what kind of environment to work well? Acidic. So those are three things that you should stick in your head. Those three things should be associated with each other. Understand that. And who's next in line? The lipids. So remember the enzymes, they start right in the mouth. The one in the mouth doesn't work so great because it only works for a short period of time, but it's there. Lipase in the mouth. Who makes lipase in the mouth? salivary glands, along with fluid and another enzyme called amylase and a bunch of electrolytes to help start the process. The big part of the digestion is going to happen, small intestine basically. We get some gastric lipase going on to break things down a little bit, but the big help is going to come in the small intestine with the help of the liver and the the pancreas and the brush border and that little green sac, the gallbladder. What's it do for me? It stores and secretes and concentrates. Remember our discussion about soap? So really important that concentrates and allows us not to have to squirt in 5 gallons of soap or 5 gallons of bile. A couple of squirts will do ya. So that's an important step. Understand those guys. And then the fourth is what? Nucleic acids. Another thing, and the reason, us crazy people that teach these courses choose textbooks like this. The other thing when you're studying, look, pretty colors. Yes? So they've taken this diagram and they've thrown it all on one page for you, and I know it's a lot of information, but if you can, in your brain, break it down into the green part and the red part and the yellow part and the purple part, that might help. Okay? Yeah, interactive physiology is very good. That's like my favorite program ever. And one of the reasons 17 years ago, believe it or not, when I started teaching this class, one of the reasons I chose this author. This book's been around a long, long time. How many editions? Yeah, 9 editions. So she's been around a while. When I started teaching, I used a different textbook. And then I was introduced to this one. And way, way back then, she came out with the beginnings of interactive physiology. And there was only like 3 of them for 3 different systems. But I loved them because that's the way I would study. If I had had those when I was in school, I would have been so happy. Because it made more sense to me teaching the class. And I imagined that it would you taking the class. So use those tools. They're great. So the book talks about all of that digestion of all the different, what do we call those pretty colored things? What are those molecules called? Carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, what are they all? They're not enzymes. Some enzymes are made of proteins. They contain carbon. Organic molecules. So remember the major organic molecules. See that chemistry crap that I taught you way back when? You still have to know that stuff. What is this a diagram of? Yeah, so now we're looking at the inside of the small intestine and we're looking at the absorption process. So after we have all of this chemical breakdown, the absorption process involves those brush border cells and a whole bunch of protein carriers on the surface of those cells. The absorptive process is very highly coordinated with the different chemicals we keep talking about, with some of the enzymes that those accessory organs to the digestive system have produced, and pH. All of these are going to help with the absorption of nutrients from the lumen of the intestine, and that's the top of the diagram, through the cell, endocytosis, exocytosis, out into where? Yep. Circulatory system is going to be the big carrier, the deliverer for me. So we have to get that stuff into the capillary beds, and we see that at the bottom of the diagram. So, digestion of proteins involves very specific molecules and very specific chemical reactions. Again, I'm not going to get crazy about this part, but I do want you to understand or have a basic understanding of some of the guys involved. Excuse me. So the goal here in protein digestion is to do what? I eat the cheeseburger. What's my goal? Break it down into what? And this is where the chemistry brain has to kick in. What are proteins made of? Amino acids. So amino acids is the goal here. When I talk about protein digestion, a series of chemicals is going to get me there until I get to this point. Carboxypeptidase. Oh, I just spit on my book. That's a big word. Carboxypeptidases, aminopeptidase, and dipeptidase. All of these guys are going to work to this goal. So you should just recognize them in association with protein digestion. You with me? Lipid digestion. Lipases. And remember, lipids have kind of an extra step because they're so honking huge. In order to get them into the circulatory system, I have to take them in where first? They can't just go into the circulatory system in the small intestine, can they? So when we look at the lining of the small intestine, we see those finger-like projections, the villi, right? So here's the picture. What's that? That's a lymphatic vessel. So they can't just in the circulatory system enter in the small intestine. They have to take a bypass. And in order to get them in there, we need help because they're hydrophobic molecules, right? So if I just throw them into a pool of water, what are they going to do? Hang all over to the side and be afraid to move through. So we need to help them get to where they need to go, the circulatory system. We have to package them up. First of all, we have to break their hold on each other. Up at the top, big fat globule of many, many, many different lipid molecules. We have to emulsify them with what? Bile salts. Now we have the components that make up a lipid. What are the components that make up a lipid? Glycerol and fatty acids. And we can create little packages for transport. Micelles are made up of fatty acids, monoglycerides, and some of those leftover bile salts from emulsification. Where am I going to get them in? Through the brush border cells, same type of receptors, except the receptors are going to be associated with picking up these little packages. Receptors are proteins on the surface of the cells. And they're specific, aren't they? So you have special receptors on the protein on the surface of your brushed border that are going to be looking out for those little micelles or packages and help them endocytosis, exocytosis get into where? They're going to go into those little lacteals and eventually be absorbed into the lymphatic system. Another special little package is created called a chylomicron. That's going to allow the lipid molecule entrance into the circulatory system. So chylomicrons are excreted from the cells that line the small intestine by exocytosis. And then where do they go? The lacteals. Once they're in the lacteals, that's the portion of the lymphatic system we find in the small intestine. Where are they going to go next? Yeah, they're going to make their way through all of those lymph node pathways and eventually dump out into the circulatory system. Yes? Nucleic acids, what are those? And DNA, RNA, all of those other things. They describe it on page 895, and some of the chemicals associated with that. Nucleases. nucleosides, phosphatases. Why are phosphatases involved? What's DNA made of? Back to the chemistry brain again. Nucleotides. What are the nucleotides made of? Phosphates, sugars. What's the third thing? Nitrogenous bases. Adenine, guanine, thymine, cytosine, uracil if we're talking about RNA. Yes? So all those enzymes kind of have names associated with all of those words, including the phosphate part, because that's important. If I want to go build more DNA or RNA, I got to have the phosphate from that molecule too. Yes? That's where we're going to absorb them. This diagram over here, excuse me, talks about the absorption of monosaccharides. And again, there's very specific enzymes associated with the breakdown of carbohydrates and the absorption of those carbohydrate units into the circulatory system. Remember, carbohydrates are made up of what? Back to the chemistry brain. Sugars, simple sugars. We call simple sugars monosaccharides. Is there only one kind of monosaccharide? Glucose is the most popular one. Fructose, galactose, yes? You with me? Those are all monosaccharides. So we have very specific enzymes associated with the absorption and then eventually, or the breakdown and eventually the absorption of those monosaccharides. And then protein absorption. Again, same thing. What are proteins made of? Amino acids. You got the point. Vitamin absorption is also discussed as well. Very important components of metabolism. Vitamins don't give us energy per se, but without them, would I be able to carry on metabolism properly? No. We call them coenzymes. They're going to help all of these different enzyme systems do their job, break things down. So they talk a little bit about vitamin absorption. I'm having trouble talking today. And electrolyte absorption. Water absorption, approximately 9 liters of water, mostly derived from the gastrointestinal tract secretions, enter the small intestine daily. So not only the stuff you drink, but look at all of these chemicals that are being scored into the whole digestive process. Water is important to make those that then will enter the digestive process. Normal rate of water absorption, 300 to 400 milliliters per hour. That's getting out of the digestive system into your what? Circulatory system. When we talk about the renal system, we're going to constantly be monitoring those levels. When they start to get a little bit too high, we're going to make more urine. When they start to get a little bit too low, we're going to make less urine. Yes? So when we talk about the renal system, we'll talk about how it is involved in balancing water. And water compartments we'll talk about under fluid and electrolytes. Chapter's over. You already did that one. You already did that one. Did we do that one? Yeah, we did that one. Stimuli that regulate gastrointestinal tract activities are generated by who? Just a little heads up about what's going to happen next week. What do you think is going to happen next week? You're going to have an exam. Well, you might have an exam. We'll see. But we're going to start the last chapter that's then going to be on your next exam. You with me? Okay. Now, this chapter is usually one of the non-most favoritist chapters in the class. It talks about nutrition, metabolism, body temperature, and regulation. Everybody's kind of good with the nutrition part of it, but they get scared about the next part of it. It describes in detail a reaction called cellular respiration. And those of you who have had biology, you're not too frightened by that, are you? No, it doesn't scare you. Those of you who haven't had it in a while might be a little scared by this. Don't be frightened. Yes? Did everybody click in, by the way? Everybody's done? What's the answer? All of the above. Very good. So remember, not only is there a chemical signal, but don't forget the nervous system's role. The nervous system plays a big role in this process. And then the enteric nerve plexus. First of all, if you have a multiple choice question, and you can definitely say two of these things, and there's a choice that says all of the above, what are you safe putting down? All of the above. Yes? So enteric refers to the guys that are down where? Yeah, down in that abdominal pelvic region, feeding into the plexus, those groups of nerves that feed into the spinal cord. Yes? Kinda? Let's do one more. Choose the answer that lists the 4 layers of the wall of the alimentary canal in the appropriate order from the inside to the outside. Innermost to outermost. Innermost to outermost. Inside to outside. Five, 4, 3, 2. Was 26 our number last time? 27? 27. What's the answer? The answer is A. That was an easy one. Because if you knew it was the mucosa on the inside, none of the other ones had it first. So you're good, right? Some of you didn't know that, though. So what are the layers? Mucosa first. I got to push stuff through the tube, and I need a slick surface to do it. So I have to produce a lot of what? Mucus, mucosa. Then underneath the mucosa, submucosa. Then I need what to push everybody along? Muscles, muscularis externa. And then who wraps up the whole thing? The serosa, some kind of serous membrane. Sometimes we'll see terms like adventitia associated with that outer wrapping. Okay? So talk yourself through it. All right, let's go on to chapter 24. Yes, I have plenty more time, so don't pack your stuff up. I have 20 minutes left. And I will use them. You know me. You love me, though, don't you? So again, don't be frightened by chapter 24. Your assignment for the weekend is to, don't forget to take your quiz on chapter 23, which I haven't opened up yet. Sorry, I forgot. But I will by the end of today. And then it's to read chapter 24. Now I want you to read it as if you were reading a novel. Seriously, when you read this for the first time, don't read it like you have to memorize every sentence, because you will overwhelm yourself and you will get nowhere. If you just read it so that hopefully some of the things that you read will become familiar to you. That's why we come to lecture then and enforce what you just read. So if that's another thing that you don't do in this class, read it before you come to class, that could possibly help you as well. Again, don't you say, oh, I just don't have time to read that chapter. It's because you're not reading it right. You're reading it like you have to memorize every word. Don't read it that way. Just read it like you're reading the paper. Okay? So that you start to get familiar with the topic and everything starts to sound a little bit familiar. Okay? So the beginning part of the book talks a little bit about the reason why we eat. And we eat to get in the molecules that we keep talking about from the previous chapter. We have to get in all of those carbohydrates and proteins and lipids and nucleic acids because we need the building blocks of all those materials for all of our chemistry. When you see the word metabolism, that word is a very general word. That means all of the chemistry that's going on in your body. So nutrients, the things that we put in our mouth, are very important building blocks of the molecules we need to make as humans. Some of the molecules we put in our mouth, we're going to use to make energy. And when we talk about the reaction of cellular respiration, that's the reaction that's going to utilize those molecules to make energy. And we have a very specific molecule we use as energy molecule for us in our metabolism. And what is that? ATP. What's ATP? Adenosine triphosphate. And how we use it is we rip off one of those phosphates at the end. That's going to release energy for us, and it's going to help drive the reactions of metabolism in our bodies. So they talk a little bit about the energy and how we measure it. It's in the form of something called a calorie. Now, a big C versus a little c refers to the amount of heat energy given off by these molecules, because that's how we measure the energy given off by ATP. So a little calorie is the amount of heat energy it takes to raise 1 gram of water 1 degree what? 1 degree Celsius. We don't use Fahrenheit in science. That's another indicator. We should probably get rid of it, right? When you look on your food that you consume, you might have nutritional facts that give you information about calories. They're not calories, they're kilocalories. Big C. And what's the definition of a kilocalorie? It's right here in your book. Second sentence, beginning of chapter. 1 kilocalorie is the amount of heat energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water 1 degree Celsius. Okay? So that heat energy is measured in kilocalories for us. And we need a certain amount of energy in order to drive all the reactions of metabolism so we can survive as humans. So every single person in this room needs the exact same amount of energy to drive their body every day. True or false? False. Why? We're all different sizes. There's more stuff in some of us than others. Some of us use more energy. How? Yeah, more activity. The more activity we have, the more energy we need. The more energy we need to drive what? Muscle contraction and all of the reactions of metabolism associated with muscle contraction. You remember those, don't you? Sodium influx, calcium release, troponin, tropomyosin, thin filaments, thick filaments, actin, myosin. Remember all that stuff? That's metabolism. So we need certain amounts of energy to do that. So, the beginning of the book talks about diet and nutrition. How to make sure we get in all of the things we need to do the work we need to do to survive. And that's basically what diet and nutrition is all about. This healthy eating pyramid has changed so much and will continue to change so much because nutrition as a science is a very new one. This book hasn't really changed that much in 17 years. How come? This science has been around a long, long time. There's a few new things on board, but for the most part, anatomy and physiology has been studied for many, many, many years. And it's pretty much tried and true now. Not to say that there's not going to be new discoveries. There will be, but not to the whole book, right? Nutrition, on the other hand, if I take my nutrition book and look at it 10 years from now, it's going to be different. I can guarantee that. Because it's a fairly new science, and we're looking at the chemistry associated with the nutrients that we bring into our body in that science and how they affect metabolism on the whole. So you see a whole bunch of different things with respect to nutrition, and these things are sort of guidelines to tell us how much foodstuffs we need to put in our body to give us all of those molecules that we need to survive as humans. And we see this healthy eating pyramid, food and nutrition, United States, what's a USDA? Yeah, those guys. Yeah, they're getting involved in quite a bit of the science of nutrition. Another thing that's kind of new to the mix is something called My Plate. It used to be called My Pyramid because it was all associated with the healthy eating pyramid. But now we're starting to try to make more visually easy things for people to see with respect to what should be on your plate when you sit down to eat. So My Plate is a place where you can go to learn about some of the information with respect to my pyramid and nutrients that we intake on a daily basis. So when we talk about nutrition, we talk about the components that we need to build our molecules. Some of them we call essential nutrients. And what are those? You can make a lot of stuff from your building blocks. Do you ever play with Legos? You get a big bucket of Legos, right? Go to the store and get Legos. Or a whole bunch of little building blocks, right? And you can make a whole bunch of things with Legos, right? You can make buildings, you can make planes, you can make people, you can make boats, right? All kind of the same little blocks, right? But sometimes when you're making a big sculpture in Legos, you can't just use those standard little blocks, right? Sometimes you need something that bends and curves around and has a special little attachment. So you can't just use those blocks to make it. You have to have a special one. Same thing in nutrition. You can use and make a lot of things from the standard nutrients that you take in. But some of them are very specific and some of them are very special. We call them essential nutrients. When I'm trying to build my proteins, many of the amino acids, and how many different amino acids do we have? 20-ish, yes? Many of them I can make. And I can make them from the building blocks that I take from the foods that I eat. But some of them I can't. In order for me to get them to make my proteins, what do I have to do? I got to eat them. They're called essential amino acids. There's about 9 of them that fall into that category. You see where I'm going with this? The other thing we might need to take in are some of the fatty acids to make our lipids. And what do we call those? Essential fatty acids. Again, the other ones I can kind of make with what I get. Think of my Legos. But that special one that does that very specific job, I need to eat it because I can't make it myself. So that's what is described under essential nutrients in the chapter. The next thing the chapter goes down and does is breaks down those categories for us. Carbohydrates. Where do I get them from? Steak?
Sugars.
Things that do what? Grow from the ground. Because who makes carbohydrates? Plants. Yes? Potatoes, corn, wheat. Can we make carbohydrates? No. Where do we have to get our... Carbohydrates are so important for us, but we can't make them. Where do we have to get them from? The food that we eat, from plants. So the bottom line is to get glucose, monomers, simple sugars to feed into the reaction of metabolism. So we need to take in carbohydrates. What are some of the different places I'm going to get it from? Anything that grows out of the ground, plants. There are some simple sugars in some products, dairy products, milk, cheese also has some of those simple sugars that we need. What do I need carbohydrates for? Glucose. What do I need glucose for? Energy. You can manipulate, and we're going to talk about this in this chapter. This is one of the things that kind of scares people about the chapter. You can manipulate other molecules to feed into a very long reaction called cellular respiration to make energy, but you're not going to make as much energy as if you take a glucose molecule and break it down, or a simple sugar and send it through the giant reaction. So that's the most efficient way to make a lot of energy and to make it fast. Metabolism of glucose and the energy that results from it is the only thing your brain wants to eat. The only thing your brain wants to use to drive its reactions of metabolism. Also, your red blood cells, very picky, only from glucose. So, if you go back to nutrition, on one of these diets to make yourself thin and beautiful in an hour, because that's pretty much all we ever want to do in this country, right? Got to lose weight, got to lose it fast. What's one of the popular diets out there now? No carbohydrates. No carbohydrates. Mr. Atkins. Anybody go on that diet? Oh, you'll lose weight. You'll look gorgeous. Yeah, happen fast. But you feel terrible. And you're tired all the time. You're tired all the time, and I can't concentrate on anything. Was it? There might be other issues there, too. Yeah. Yeah. But there might be other things that might be just disturbing to your system that you might not know about. For example, certain diseases have trouble with certain carbohydrates. Anybody ever hear of celiac disease? Okay, so somebody that goes on a diet like that feels so much better because now they've eliminated the thing that's been bothering them their whole lives. But you need carbohydrates for your brain. Some of these diets tout no more than 20 grams of carbohydrates a day. Yeah, no. You should never, ever go lower than 200 grams of carbohydrates a day. That's 10 times less than your brain needs to function.
Snickers bar. Good.
Eat a Snickers bar.
All sugar.
Well, that's good. So you have to be careful.
You get the peanuts, you get the sugar.
Yeah, it's like the complete package right there. So it breaks down all the different categories in your textbook. Carbohydrates, what do I need them for? Carbohydrates, think that energy molecule. Where do I get them from? Lipids, what do you need them for? You need them for energy as well, and protection. And every single cell in your body has a covering on it. What's the covering made of? Back to your chemistry brain. Phospholipid bilayer. Yes? And you're an animal. What else from the lipid family? Cholesterol. Is that ringing a bell? So do I need lipids in my diet? Yes. Remember, there's some nutrients that I can't make myself from the building blocks, the big bucket of Legos that I eat, that I have to make sure I get the special ones in. What are they called? Essential. And what are the building blocks of lipids called? Glycerol and fatty acids. So essential fatty acids need to be consumed as well. So we have to make sure that we get those into our diet. Another great diet out there years ago, no fat! Because that you're going to get thin if you never ever eat fat, because fat makes us fat. Is that true? Yeah, no. I gained 20 pounds on a low-fat diet. Because I ate too many what? Carbohydrates. We're really efficient at taking care of what we bring in. And if we take in too many of anybody, where are we going to put it? We're going to store it away for a rainy day. We're going to convert it into lipids. So if we eat too many carbohydrates, we're going to make them into the stored form of my energy, lipids. You with me? You need to take them in. You need to take them in daily. About 20% of your calorie intake, that energy intake, should be from lipids. And that's on the low end. So if you want to go on a low-fat diet, make sure you take in at least 20% of your calories from fat, because you need them to make your plasma membranes, and very important, steroid-like hormones and cholesterol. So you need those Legos. Remember, you can't make your creations unless you have the proper building blocks. So when you hear something like you are what you eat, are you getting the point that you are what you eat? So if you have shoddy building materials, you have a shoddy building. Think back to the 3 little pigs story when you were little. Yes? You want to make your building of brick, not straw. We'll pick up on Tuesday with this chapter, and we'll finish most of it. Okay? So we'll decide on Tuesday when we're going to have the test, whether it's going to be on Thursday or whether it's going to be the following Tuesday. Okay? If you didn't get your test, come pick it up. I'll see ya on Tuesday. I will also, by the end of the day, have the quiz for chapter 23 posted online.